G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day, and I know it's the end of the weekend, but I hope that you had a great weekend. My partner ran a half marathon this morning, so it's been a little bit slower, at least in the afternoon around here, but today we do have less than usual. I know my nose keeps growing in the light, so the video is getting shorter, but I promise one day maybe. So we're going to look at some strikes, we're going to look at some new weapons, and what would the approval of more long-range weapon systems to Kyiv actually look like in strikes further out and further into Russia? What maybe then would be the Kremlin's response? We'll talk then about that. We have a lot of maps to go over, as you know if you watched yesterday. Syriac didn't have any maps released yesterday. Today, bang, Syriac's got like 14 of them. And of course, Deep State is showing some movement as well. In around that Pokrovsk area, we have some movement in the north. So of course, we're going to go over all of that. Now, look, let's just start with the strikes. We'll do this, get it out of the way. Something I forgot in the intro too is we will speak about defensive positions, and I forgot another thing here. The CEO of Telegram, Pavel Durov, has been arrested by French authorities in Paris, getting off his private jet. So come and join the Telegram, and if Telegram becomes no more, well, it's been a pleasure serving with Willie's PMC on there, but come and join. So look, let's talk about some strikes and some POWs as well. So it's Independence Day in Ukraine. It's a bit hard because of the time zone difference here, because once you see this, it won't be anymore in Ukraine, but it wasn't when I filmed yesterday. But one thing we have seen today in those celebrations and the speeches is there was a POW swap for 115 personnel. It actually ended up 230 because it was 115 Ukrainians returned and 115 Russians were returned as well. And Zelensky in his Twitter post here says, thanks to every unit that adds to our exchange fund. This brings close the release of our military civilians. And we see here that the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, it was the intermediary between this to make this happen. We see the UAE and Saudi doing a lot on this, but we see exchange fund. And this is one of the things we think a lot to do with Kursk was to get some land to maybe swap, maybe some villages to swap, but a lot of POWs to swap here. This, unlike some, was a 1-for-1, 115 for 115. So a lot of people then returning home today. So let's have a look at an ammo depot that has been blown up in Russia. So this is where this is. Now, this is in Voronezh. Now, this isn't the exact geolocation, but this is the geolocation of where they were observing the explosion from, so close enough to here. So about 150 Ks from where I've put this, and this is said to be a Ukrainian Neptune missile, the same type that we actually saw hit the ferry down at Kavkaz between Russia and Crimea. Now, many Twitter pages, including ones with literally millions of followers, are sharing this clip. Now, for one point, this is actually correct in this Twitter here, that this clip is not from this recent attack here. The clip is from the beginning of August, attack on the Morozovsk airfield in Rostov. So another strike against Russia, but this footage, this is not the footage to this. The footage is this that we see here. So we don't exactly know how much damage was there, but you can hear in the footage too a lot of secondary explosions too, saying that this was a large ammo dump, ammo depot that has then been destroyed there. We'll get more of an idea on it. Now, we have seen as well in testing, no confirmations of use, at least from what I'm seeing, this new Palyansia Ukrainian drone being used. Now, what you can see is this is a fairly analog copy of some of the more Iranian drones we see Russia using inside of Ukraine. Well, Russian made, but they're an analog of the Iranian drone. But what you can see here is instead of having a small propeller, that this is actually a jet-powered drone. Of course, what this does is, and as you'll obviously see here, as that's released, the speed of the drone is significantly increased, and they are far, far lower. Of course, it's not going to have the speed of a bloody missile, but it will have a lot longer range due to having, more broad wings. So we'll be able to go much further. That rain is coming down insane. But this is what I want to speak about with these drones to line up with what we see a lot of messaging coming from Zelensky and from Kyiv and from many others as well, that Ukraine wants permission from the West to use long-range Storm Shadow missiles to destroy targets deep inside Russia, believing this could force Moscow into negotiating an end to the fighting. Now, one thing I've put here in my notes is these long-range strikes against, say, electricity, infrastructure, critical infrastructure, military targets too, this will, of course, bring the war home to a lot of people in Russia as well. It will have an effect on some elements, but what we need to also do is look at the effect that the missile strikes of Russia's campaign has had in Ukraine now over these 2.5 years with many, many cruise missile strikes, and it doesn't then render everything completely useless. It definitely won't be 100% crushing defeat that needs to then come to, I guess, the negotiating table there. So what you can do in this is you can look at what has worked or hasn't worked on the side, or what has the effect of this, and you can at least get an idea of how it may look on the other side. Senior figures in Kyiv have suggested using the Anglo-French weapons in a demonstration attack that will show the Kremlin that military sites near the capital itself will be vulnerable to direct strikes. So a Storm Shadow missile has the range of around, at least open source, of around 550 kilometers. Like I say, the further something flies, the more likely it is to then be intercepted. It's in the air for a longer time to be jammed, longer time to be intercepted. St. Petersburg is around 850 kilometers away, that we have seen people point at then down here, negotiating if it believes Ukraine's ability to threaten Moscow and St. Petersburg. So according to open source data, St. Petersburg is out of range of those missiles if they're fired from Ukraine. Moscow is about 500, depending where you put the bloody measurement, so right on the end of this. But what I want to speak about in this is I don't know if this is the most effective way to actually have effect on target at that end. Yes, as a demonstration of, look, the West has given us permission to use these cruise missiles inside, striking this and that. Demonstration, PR, messaging, 100%. Will it have then forced negotiating table? I don't believe so. But I also, and like I spoke about yesterday and recently, I actually think the most effect on target is to use, like that new drone I've shown you, in swarms. I think as far as the limited amount of Storm Shadow Scalp long-range missiles that Ukraine have, them not being domestically produced, so there is some concern about where they are used from then the supporting parties of Ukraine with those domestically produced drones where they can use them basically wherever they want. Of course, they're far cheaper. You can have them in far more numerical numbers. I think for getting through the air defense, knowing some of them are going to get shot down, even if a lot of them get shot down, some will get through, longer range may actually be the better option then for Ukraine. If that wasn't a tactic that would work, we wouldn't see Russia continually still firing drones, even at a 80, 90, sometimes 100%, at least claimed down rate of them inside of Ukraine as well. So again, you need to sort of look at what is going on here as well. I think one of the main things people don't take into consideration here is we know from the leaked German phone calls about the Storm Shadow Scalp that there are people from France or Britain inside Ukraine helping then with the direct targeting, control, everything of these weapons. At least from that leaked phone call, that is it. I think that there is a concern that if these are used further, more broadly inside of Russia, that Russia's response to this might be to start downing then the unmanned systems over the Black Sea that are providing intel and guidance, surveillance, all of this to Ukraine as well. And this is, I guess, the toss-up that there needs to be is, okay, if those start getting brought down, but you've got these, is the juice worth the squeeze? I think that might be the concern from Britain, France. Let me know if I'm wrong, but I think that could be on that escalation ladder. I think that is something that we may see. But let me know. We're going to talk more about drones, pieces of equipment in a second. After then, we have a look at the maps, which is what half of you are here for. So here, of course, is Ukraine, the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. The red check on this map is territory that Russia has made within the last 24 hours. The green is Russia territory Russia has lost in the past, over 2 weeks, blue under 2 weeks. Some of this actually up in here should actually be green at this point between Sumy and Kursk. Now you can see that there is some red check on this map. Let's do the maps first, and then I want to speak about the north in itself incomplete, where we have seen some movement there too. So the first area we're going to go is, of course, Donetsk Oblast and the Avdiivka, now Pokrovsk front. Now, it is closer to Pokrovsk than Avdiivka. And what you can see here is in multiple directions that more ground has then been made here, putting a lot of pressure on then areas like Kalinivka, Kalinove, Memrik, and of course, to the south here. Many have speculated that the push is going to be south to line up with the Ugledar front, where we saw Russia pushing very hard out of Mariinka and in Krasnohivka recently, and now recently too in Konstantinivka, that this is all part of to collapse this line through here. Again, time will tell us what is actually going to happen then here. So let's then line this up with the Syriac map, and then what I'll do is I actually want to show you where the defensive works are in here, and a lot of pages today saying that Ukraine is building now even new defensive works in and around Pokrovsk or behind Pokrovsk as well. Now I can't confirm that, that is just what I have seen being claimed. So if we have a look down around this reservoir here, we can see that this ground is lining up as well further through Novohorovka. Now, as well, we know this in here, this is lining up sort of with that geolocated footage I showed you yesterday of the Ukrainian tank being engaged by infantry, which was right about here where these red top buildings are. Now, like I've always said, grey zone on this should be way bigger either way. I wish there was almost like a grey red, a grey blue, and then faded into red, faded into blue, because there's so much, I guess, unknown. But the grey through here would be all of, if I was hanging out in here, it's still contested if there's infantry on the ground by geolocated then footage. So that is then what we can see, this expansion of control out towards Horovka as well, pushing up, of course, in that direction of Pokrovsk. Now, while we're here, what I then want to show you is the defensive works. Now, let's just have a quick look at where this is. So we'll look at Memrik, Kalinove, where we're going, and you can see, if we line up, that the front line is sort of right down near Memrik, Kalinivka here. So it's right, pushing down in here, at least that grey zone now, that a lot of this main defensive work is really coming under control now by at least this map. And like I've said, these ones, at least by this map, are really built for a east to west advancement, and we're not sure how effective it may be against this. Unlike this one before Pokrovsk, you will see could be significantly more effective. We will then see. But like I have said, you can see this then thinning out. It will be interesting to see if this does actually speed up after this, but there's a lot of talk about further and more defensive works currently being built. My opinion, should have been built in some areas 10 years ago. But you can see around Novohorovka that there is then a push through this defensive work. Now, where we're talking about is here. This is where we saw the Russian infantry on the ground. Now, I showed you yesterday and I said, look, it's very interesting and it could be a testament to the speed of this movement that this area wasn't completely destroyed in Novohorovka by FABs shelling, like typically we see with Russia with that deep sort of maneuver under mass artillery. But we have one thing that could be here is that they massively shelled the defensive work outside of here. They managed to get a breakthrough. Therefore, the city itself, as far as completely flattened, isn't typically what we'd see on a break-in, depending on where the defensive work is. So that is interesting to see. This map hasn't updated to where we believe the front line is laying here either. So then we have another Avdiivka map. So we'll take into Kalinivka these two then reservoirs here. And Syriac here shows what I would presume is this area in here. The trap at some point then has actually been then filled in by Russia in here. And it does seem that Ukraine actually got out of this area. We thought that could have been really, really difficult at one point. People saying that Russia may have been trapped in here, but could have been the other way, but we're not exactly sure. This doesn't show that it's filled in yet, but it shows that it is contested, but it's showing more near Kalinivka, and that this in here could get sort of flanked and absorbed in as well. Now, where I want to move is just down to the south of here, where this map, the Ukrainian deep state map, shows us another shift. And of course, this is Ugleda. Now, what we have seen over the past couple of weeks, that this sat way back here somewhere, and it has stepped up. Originally, it stepped up here to cross then this road, and now we have seen a step up to this road, of course, limiting some supplies in here. Now, I don't believe I have a map update for you right here. No, I do not right here. So, move up a little bit more. Novomailivka sort of front, Paraskovsky, Konstantinivka. I do believe, yes, I have a map update just in here. Now, where this is showing, this is a little bit more difficult to then see, but we have Mariinka. This is Mariinka. Pobeda is here. That Surak is showing that this area in here is starting to fill in just to the north of Paraskovskia. This map's not really keeping up with some of the claims, at least Surak is making around Konstantinivka. Again, this is why we like multiple maps to, I guess, back up claims being made. Now, let's just push up a little bit more, and we have Krasnohivka. We know most of this has come under control. There's been a hell of a lot of fighting in here. It's been somewhere we've spoken about a lot due to like things like the turtle tanks, etc. So in here, nothing major, but what you can see is just a bit of increased Russian control down to the south of Krasnohivka here. Again, nothing too obvious on this map is red, but what you can see is a grey zone shift here. So there has definitely been some level of movement in here or advancement by the Russian forces, not confirmed, but we can say there's definitely been movement there looking by this map. Now we'll just push up then a little bit more. We have then the New York Toretsk front. Now this still showing in New York. Very difficult to know exactly what is happening here. Now in here, no changes shown today, but we do have two updates in here. So this is the first one I want to show you. So Surak is showing an expansion of control out into Toretsk, out from Bivnyachi as well. And then later on, more advancement out of Zaleznay, breaking in just down in here. So on sort of two fronts into Toretsk itself. It'll be, again, difficult to know exactly how this will look. Will there be a withdrawal? Will there be a massive fight in Toretsk itself? Again, difficult to know. Or could it be a bit like New York, where instead of fighting through some of these central blocks, it's more go around it and try and more envelop it. That is what typically we see of a lot of these Russian tactics. Let's move up into Bakhmut then here. Now, just near Klishkivka, we do have an update from Surak just here. So look where this train line then whips around. So just out in about where my cursor is here, he's saying that the Russia army took control over a series of fortifications northwest. Again, not being shown on this map and no shift there. So again, grain of salt with anything that we can't confirm across multiple bits and pieces. We'll keep working our way up. We have Rozdilivka, Vimimka. This is an area where we've seen a lot of back and forward. We actually believe that Russia, judging by Ukrainian maps and Surak and whatever, Russia had a push up here and then actually couldn't hold it, so had a withdrawal. That's this grey zone right here. And you can see today, towards Vimimka, it's saying that Russia did make some ground just to the east side of the railway in here, expanded over the last couple of days. In here, again, difficult to know exactly what is happening. Now, we'll move our way up, and we saw then, about 3 days ago, that Ukraine had an advancement into here near Novovdyanny as well. Now, this hasn't expanded since then, so on the 22nd to 23rd, we saw it. Since then, no shifts on this, and Surak as well. We can 100% confirm this occurred because Surak is also showing very amount of similar movement there too. So was a counteroffensive in here. Zelensky did say there's going to be a step-by-step process to push back through in the north here too. So it'll be interesting to see how that then occurs. Now, in Pashani, just north of here, this is where we did see some advancement, some withdrawal pushback in here, and we can see today no shift on this map here, but Surak does show the claimed Russian expansion here just out to the north. Of course, he shows a further easterly push here, but showing that there's more expansion out to the north in and around where my cursor is here. So if you see where this triangle sort of paddock is, this is said triangle paddock. So he's saying look where my cursor is, it's all the way sort of like this in here. So again, wait and see. Eventually it'll become more clear exactly what it's looking like on the maps. Now we're going to go to the north. The reason we delayed this is we do have a lot to speak about on the north as well. So let's push up into the north. Now let's have a scroll back and then forward. Now this map is showing no changes in the north, at least to my eye, unless you see something changing. We go to the Noel reports map. Now for the second day, we haven't actually seen any changes. The blue check is still back at the 22nd. So a couple of days here, we haven't seen any shift after a good 2 weeks of every day we started seeing it. Does this mean this is stabilized? No, it may have just moved into more difficult areas to make ground, and the amount of information to change the mapping may not be there as well. It will be interesting to see what exactly then actually occurs here. But what I will say is Syriac, he does show that there are changes on these maps in here too. So this is why we use many different sources as well. Here we go. So we can see up in here that if we look at where this Sheptukovka is, Syriac does show there is blue zone right up to here, and it's well on the west. So where this is just shown as grey on this map, Syriac is showing that as blue as well, and he is saying out to the west here from Snagost as well that there is, but you can see this map is showing it. So just in here, it has been moved out as well. So he's updated his map on this axis. Ukraine Army made new advances towards there. On the other hand, the area north of here was rectified, showing following situation. This is up in the north, while it remains under Ukrainian control. This locality of Zuravil is contested or completely empty, and clashes between both sides continue the rest of the front without changes. So it's showing some changes in here, but a correction of how far those sort of two prongs came up in here. And these could meet and close up elements up in here as well. It'll be interesting to see now that the bridges are somewhat cut in here, if Russia can continue the logistics supply, and if Ukraine can actually supply the logistics to their own forces to take over this area to the south of Glashkovo as well. Then we have one more Syriac update here too. Now, this one is out to the east, and I will show you on this. Here we go. Russian army recaptured the locality of Spalnoy. Clashes with Ukrainian army continuing the rest of the front without changes. So he's showing that in an area down in here that the Russian army took back some amount of ground. Now, this is not the easiest area to show you, but what we need to look for is where this sort of bubbles out and comes on the border. One of the problems here is it's not always shown at north as up. So we look at Borky here and we zoom in, and it's just this bit here in the grey. This is where Syriac is saying that Russia has pushed back into here and pushed out the Ukrainians there. So again, the north is very difficult to know exactly what is happening. Now in Kharkov, Kursk, sort of up near the power plant, we are seeing Frontline Intelligence Insight. He's the one that actually purchased these satellite imagery too. It does show new Russian trenches being built as well, digging in here. And this is something that we've spoken about a lot. If Russia choose not to push back through here and leave Ukraine to occupy this area and dig in trenches, hold it, not take the base, it actually could backfire on Ukraine, because now they've got another 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 square kilometres to man, and Russia in defence will have far less people there, that it could backfire, jeopardising areas in the east for Ukraine as well. Ukraine, I think, is heavily relying on Russia taking the bait in here and moving forces away, which has happened, but not to the same degree which I think many would have liked. So let's read through this. More than 2 weeks into Ukraine's incursion into Western Russia, Ukrainian politicians have begun talking about establishing a buffer zone there. Not only the buffer zone, but like we spoke about at the beginning, with things like POWs and land, what Zelensky says as the exchange fund. They've broadened their incursion wherever they find the least resistance. So where there's not resistance, broaden to gain territory, as well as that resistance can be, where is there a full-time element, where is there maybe a border guard reserve element, we can take more POWs more easily. After the first week of fighting, Ukraine claimed to control almost 400 square miles of Russian territory, an area roughly the size of LA. And like I've said, less toxic and safer than LA, and less bloody influences and maybe crackheads. That the American officials are not convinced that Ukraine intends to hold its positions in Russia long term. Ukrainian forces have not been digging the kind of extensive trenches necessary to protect soldiers and equipment from enemy fire. If Russia musters enough firepower to repel the attack, they have not been laying minefields to slow the counterattack, nor have they constructed barriers to slow down Russian tanks. So if Russia actually does launch that, one of the things Ukraine will need to have is dug-in defensive works, engineering vehicles there. We've seen a little bit of it, but not to the extent you'd actually have to hold that. And that's one of the things. If Ukraine does stop that advancement, that is where they have the upper hand, is in that manoeuvre element. But if they pause, stop in place, that's when we can see those FABs and the artillery really starting to pick that apart. And with the amount of ISR in the air, to actually dig that with, not just by shovel, but I mean with engineering vehicles, would also be very difficult. What the war has shown us so far is the way to slow a military down is through defence in depth. Thank you. Yes, we know that. Defence in depth, you have an element can even fall and this can hit it, and then that can move back and that can hit it. Everything from section minor tactics all the way up to divisional level. In a reference to the strategy of using multiple layers of defence, if they are not defending territory with a mixture of trenches and mines, it's going to be virtually impossible to hold territory. If Russia do launch a counter attack in here with tens of thousands, it will be very difficult area to hold, but Ukraine can just also withdraw out of here. But like we've said, if Russia don't take the bait, because they're going to have tens of thousands up here, that could be even worse than for the east. The more territory Ukraine captures, the greater the challenge it will be for the some 10,000 Ukrainian troops there to defend it. The number's somewhere between 10 and 30,000. The Pentagon official said Ukraine's delay in building defensive fortifications did not necessarily mean that Kyiv did not intend to hold the territory in Russia. Ukraine could look to build defensive positions even deeper inside Russia, extending that buffer zone. So maybe Ukraine's looking to actually go further and build them in further. The further out, the more strain, though, on those logistical supplies. While Ukraine's initial attack was carefully planned, it succeeded far beyond their original goals. That is what I'm being said. I have been told from guys who have been there somewhat differently to that, at least in some directions as well. But we will see. I think far beyond their original goals, maybe in terms of square kilometres, but as far as redeployment of forces, I think under what the original foresight was in eastern Ukraine, where Russia has been making slow gains, but has been grinding forward. You're going to have in any built up, heavily fortified area, it is going to be slow grind. The Russia's military's general staff is in charge. The FSB, Russia's security agency, successor with KGB, blah, 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 is responsible for the response to the Ukrainian incursion. So it's difficult because it's on Russian ground. It's very difficult as a security response or armed forces response. Who's in charge? There's been some sort of stuff around with that as well. Declaring it a terror attack by a country, all that becomes more difficult. Russia most likely needs 15 to 20 brigades, at least some 50,000 troops to push Ukraine out of Kursk. 3-1, 4-1, something like that. Of course, it's a hell of a lot of guys. I think that's what Ukraine want, is for them to mobilise that amount of guys up to there, to redeploy that amount, pull out, and then hit somewhere else very quickly. But if they don't take the bait, that is going to be a problem too if you have to hold there. It's had a shocking effect on the Russians. Shocking, not as far as it's collapsing everything. Shocking as like, holy shit. NATO's top military commander said last week that the foreign countries, blah, blah, blah. They're shocked by it. That won't persist forever. They'll gather themselves together and react accordingly. So it surprised them. And then in time, we know Russia react very slow to things like this. Then they'll get themselves together and see what will come from there. Ukraine's offensive so far has captured several settlements, more than that, and one town in Russia. It is yet to fulfill the key goal of drawing significant numbers of Russian units from eastern Ukraine. Russia sent most reserve units and troops from areas in southern and northeastern Ukraine that are not part of Moscow's main thrust towards the city of Pokrovsk. Again, we don't exactly know what the end goal in here really is. We hear exchange fund, we heard other things, we've heard this redeployment, everything from distraction, everything can be difficult to know. That you talk about then the buffer zone that Zelensky spoke about, the exchange fund in here. We're still working with Ukraine and how that fits their strategic objectives on the battlefield itself. Now, this is one of the things from the Pentagon press secretary. It might be, we don't exactly know how this fits your other strategic objectives either, but we will see. It's their intention to continue to hold ground. Was asked how large they're going to expand. Mr. Olsen voiced concern about Ukrainian forces being stretched too thin along the 1,000-kilometre front line, 600 miles. Of course, being stretched on the battlefield is something that the Secretary discussed. It's what we spoke about. If a lot of forces are in here, 10,000 guys, really well-trained too, we've seen the East then speed up. If Russia don't take the bait, that can cause a huge problem. And like I've said, Russia may choose, right, let's push harder on the East and actually force them to withdraw and sort of have a backfire of that, like, yeah, we're going to push here to draw Russia up, but if Russia continue to push here, you may have to go back down as well. In the days of the offensive, the US and Britain have provided Ukraine with satellite imagery and other information about the Kursk region, not to help Ukraine push deeper into Russia, but to allow its commanders to better track Russian reinforcements that might attack them or cut off their eventual withdrawal back to Ukraine. That's not mutually exclusive. If you're not to help Ukraine push deeper, but you're having all this ISR in to track reinforcements and cut off, isn't it the same thing? Regardless, we presume that 100%. We know massive amounts of intel satellites. Everything is going into Ukraine, now an ally of the US and Britain, with the satellites cruising overhead. Some American officials say the more land Ukraine tries to take in Western Russia, the greater the risk of overextending its supply lines and air defense umbrella. Yes, as well, that it does then risk that with a numerically inferior force and the risk of crossing some of those elements across. And pushing more forces into Kursk creates weaknesses along the front lines in eastern Ukraine. Ukraine has expanded the front line, which carries a certain risk that it requires more personnel and equipment to hold that line. Again, then potentially jeopardise down the east. Ironically, American military officials say that with the Kursk offensive, Ukraine has finally managed to show that it knows how to conduct combined arms manoeuvring, synchronised attacks by infantry, armour, artillery forces. During Ukraine's failed counteroffensive a year ago, its forces struggled with combined arms despite months of training. Right. Combined arms warfare, manoeuvre warfare, very NATO doctrine stuff. A lot of that isn't super effective until you have a breakthrough. Them saying, it failed in the counteroffensive, blah, 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 by months of training. You can't outmaneuver 1,000 kilometres of depth lines with fucking mines everywhere until you have a break-in manoeuvre in depth, similar to if you had known anything about Soviet doctrine and deep manoeuvre doctrine. You can't have that in until you have that pushed through that line. You can't just, there's no way you can't just flank that line unless you were to, row your boat out into the Black Sea and come in then behind it with 1,000 tanks, which is not going to, it doesn't work like that. So I think this is a little bit critical of something that is more complex than that. And I think one of the things here is it was actually more of a loss absorption issue and commitment to that push through that line. Let's take Uruzani or Robotny front, where we saw the two prongs trying to push in on that Ukrainian counteroffensive. One of the elements of attritional war that really indicates who's going to have success is the ability to absorb losses and who will commit to have losses to make ground. And I think at the time, with limited mobilisation, and this is something I still say, I can't believe there's not been a mobilisation, not of thousands, not of tens of thousands, of hundreds of thousands, because to push through anywhere there before you can start that combined arms manoeuvre, you're going to have a certain commitment to have large losses and the ability to absorb those losses to get through. This is something I've spoken about. How is this going to look different in a year time? Those lines are just more fortified again. One thing I have said is people take the piss when we see Russia push in Krasnohivka, Novomaylivka. Well, look, they're just sending tanks in convoys and they're turning around or getting smashed by artillery and this and that. Blah, blah, blah. I don't see how else anywhere in the east. So what's happened up here, unless there's some major shift, will not happen in here where we see then these, how do I turn on defensive works here? Cannot happen down in here with these defensive works. There's going to have to be a commitment to an area, an ability to absorb large losses until you can get into that line or even behind that line and then conduct the combined arms deep manoeuvre. But there's no way to break into any area without massive risks, exactly like, we see those entire convoys of Russian vehicles getting fucking thrashed in areas around maybe Krasnohivka, Novomaylivka, wherever. Like I say, I don't see how any tactic other than the umbrella maneuver under artillery, but you're still going to have that break in and know there's going to be huge amount of attriting forces to get that foothold before you can start using that axis as a point that you can actually then swing off and use your leverage out from for manoeuvre combined arms warfare. And without a huge amount of mobilisation, you're not going to be able to buffer those losses either. This is like I've said, with Ukraine's defensive lines, with Russia's defensive lines, to achieve the goals of what Ukraine and Russia have set militarily, not diplomatically, taking out of account some sort of collapse somewhere, some black swan sort of event, there's going to be hundreds of thousands more casualties to push through anywhere. What has changed between then and now on either side? Better defensive works, more experience in this level of warfare. And one of the elements of attritional war, like I said, the ability to commit and absorb large losses. You know me, I hate loss at war, trust me. But if you're sitting there completely numerical, moving chess pieces around, that is part of it. Anyway, legends. Oh my God. How is this so long? Look after yourself. Have a great day. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.